What if the most profound truths about human origins were not lost to time, but were meticulously hidden? What if the monumental structures of our earliest known civilizations, those foundational blueprints of mathematics, law, and astronomy, were built upon a deliberate omission, a historical gap enforced by the very beings we once worshipped? We begin our journey not in the dusty archives of modern academia, but in the blinding sun and shifting sands of the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization itself. We speak, of course, of Sumer. Historians marvel at the suddenness with which Sumerian culture exploded onto the world stage, possessing a complexity that seems to defy the natural, staggered rhythm of cultural evolution. It is a recognized historical anomaly, a civilization appearing seemingly complete, equipped with a sophisticated writing system, cuneiform, organized irrigation, complex legal codes, and a pantheon of gods who walked among men, commanding armies and shaping the landscape. This rapid genesis, however, often causes us to overlook a subtle yet crucial aspect of their recorded history: the pervasive sense of being watched and governed. The Sumerian texts are not just records of kings and battles. They are detailed accounts of observation, instruction, and, critically, enforced obedience to the Anunnaki, those entities described as descending from the heavens. But what if these ancient scribes, while faithfully recording the deeds of their divine rulers, also left subtle cracks in the narrative wall? What if they possessed accounts, fragments painstakingly concealed and scattered across countless clay tablets, that revealed not just the actions of the Anunnaki, but the intent that lay beneath those actions? The intent that these powerful, advanced beings worked desperately to erase, to bury deep beneath the weight of sanctioned mythology. The approved history told a story of creation and guidance. The forbidden history whispered of exploitation, cycles of control, and a truth about human potential that the Anunnaki could not afford to let blossom. Think of those countless clay tablets, thousands upon thousands, recovered from the ruins of ancient Uruk, Nippur, and Lagash. They represent the largest textual record of any ancient society. Yet we primarily focus on the epic poems, the king lists, and the detailed economic ledgers. These are the public records, the documents intended for posterity, authorized by the ruling class, often in league with their non-human overseers. They form the canonical version of history, the one where mankind is a mere laborer, a slave designated to serve the needs of the celestial visitors. This is the official narrative, the one deliberately left for us to find, to translate, and to accept as the whole truth. But an empire built on secrecy always leaves loose threads. The sheer volume of material means that some subversive truths, some accidental admissions, some unauthorized personal accounts must have slipped through the filtering mechanism. We are searching for the digital equivalent of deleted files, files that were thought to be permanently purged from the hard drive of civilization, only to be found fragmented and scattered across obscure sectors of the ancient record. We are looking for the documents that speak not of the glorious arrival of the Anunnaki, but of the specific, crucial reasons why they felt the need to impose strict amnesia upon their human charges regarding the true pre-history of Earth, and indeed the prehistory of their own presence here. Imagine the Anunnaki as cosmic editors, rewriting the draft of history to suit their immediate and long-term goals. They possessed the technology and longevity to oversee and manage this historical revision across millennia. Their goal was simple: to secure their status as necessary deities, erasing any evidence that might suggest human evolution was anything other than a tailored, accelerated project designed purely for servitude. What they feared was not rebellion, but realization, the sudden human recognition that their lineage, their capacity, and their place in the cosmos were far grander, far more independent than the limited role they had been assigned. This requires us to approach the familiar texts of Sumer with a new kind of skepticism. We must not merely read what the tablets say, but understand why they say it, and more importantly, what they pointedly refuse to mention. The key to unlocking this hidden past lies in recognizing the linguistic and mythological discrepancies, the faint, echoing inconsistencies between different accounts of the same event, particularly concerning the Great Flood. The flood, as recorded in various Mesopotamian epics, served a dual purpose. It was a cataclysmic geological event, certainly, but in the context of the hidden narrative, it functioned as the ultimate historical reset button. It was a perfect divine opportunity to wipe the slate clean, destroying physical evidence and the vast majority of witnesses who carried the unedited memory of the pre-Diluvian world. We are hunting for the echoes of what survived that purge, the unauthorized accounts carried forward by those who escaped the waters and, more significantly, the specific cuneiform texts that managed to avoid destruction in the libraries that were meticulously curated by the Anunnaki's human proxies. These records speak of technology, of astronomical cycles far older than acknowledged, and of a prior race of humanity that lived in symbiotic relationship with the planet, untainted by the forced genetic intervention of the arriving extraterrestrial miners. This is where the real work of uncovering the hidden begins. It demands patience, meticulous cross-referencing, and a willingness to discard the comfortable certainties of mainstream archaeology. If the Sumerian records are indeed the deepest wellspring of our recorded history, then the most dangerous secrets must lie within its darkest corners, preserved on tablets that were perhaps deemed too mundane, too fragmented, or simply too obscure to merit the senses' attention. We must become the detectives of deep time, tracing the path of the narrative not through the grand pronouncements of kings, but through the peripheral descriptions of daily life and the almost accidental references to the old ways, the traditions and knowledge that persisted despite the relentless efforts to enforce historical amnesia. As we delve deeper into this investigation, your presence and focused attention become critical components of the process. If these Sumerian records truly hold the fragmented keys to a past that the Anunnaki tried to suppress, then our collective scrutiny acts as a shield against that historical obscurity. This is not simply a story. It is a shared intellectual endeavor to reconstruct a lost epoch. Therefore, as we continue this exploration, pause for a moment and consider: which fundamental pillar of human history do you personally suspect is a deliberate fabrication or a heavily edited narrative? Share your thoughts below. Your insights, your willingness to reflect deeply on these complex issues are what sustain this search for truth. If this quest resonates with that quiet, persistent doubt deep within your own sense of history, please consider joining this community by liking this video and subscribing to ensure you do not miss the crucial continuations of this detailed investigation. Your participation helps bring these shadowed truths into the light, defying the intended permanence of the cosmic editors. The text we are seeking is not a grand epic easily recognizable as a challenge to the status quo. It is, instead, a dense, repetitive, almost bureaucratic record, a series of administrative instructions and astronomical logs that, when decoded through a specific lens, betray the true relationship between the Anunnaki and the nascent human race. It is within the mundane details that the most spectacular secrets often reside. For example, why did certain Anunnaki leaders suddenly change their names? Or why do different tablets attribute the same creation event to vastly different divine architects? These are not simple transcription errors. They are the result of conflicting political factions among the Anunnaki themselves, factions that had opposing views on how much of the original, unedited truth humanity should be allowed to retain. We begin by isolating the specific cuneiform tablets that deal explicitly with the designation of Lulu Amelu, the primal worker, the human being created for labor. The authorized mythology stresses the necessity and benefit of this creation. But the suppressed texts hint at the profound cost, not just the physical labor, but the excision of an innate wisdom, a direct connection to cosmic cycles that was present in the prior human template. The Anunnaki did not just create a laborer, they engineered a species that was psychologically and spiritually dependent on external authority, thereby ensuring the longevity of their golden age on Earth. They hid the true source code of humanity. The texts that break this established narrative often refer obliquely to events occurring before the designation of the Lulu Amelu, moments of great internal conflict among the Anunnaki themselves regarding the ethical parameters of their intervention. These specific tablets hint at a profound remorse felt by a small, exiled faction of the celestial visitors, a faction that tried, through coded language and hidden archives, to preserve the memory of the past they were forced to destroy. This leads us directly to the foundational text, the specific tablet that survived the historical cleansing, not through accident, but through the deliberate, dangerous efforts of a hidden Sumerian priesthood dedicated to keeping the authentic memory alive, a memory that would expose the ultimate deception. The text we are about to examine in detail is a complex mosaic of prophecy, accounting, and political history that reveals, with chilling clarity, the true timeline of the Anunnaki presence on Earth, and the exact reasons why they desperately tried to conceal the existence of that prior, untouched lineage of humanity. It is the Forbidden Chronicle, and its name and its content demands our undivided attention as we move into the next phase of this unprecedented investigation. Did the Anunnaki truly give us civilization, or did they merely redact a chapter of history we were already writing? We stand at the precipice of recognizing that the most powerful narratives are often those defined not by what they contain, but by what they deliberately exclude. The profound silence surrounding the earliest ages of human existence, those epochs just preceding the supposed arrival of the celestial visitors, is perhaps the loudest testament to the magnitude of the secret they sought to bury. We have meticulously sifted through the cuneiform libraries, marveling at the sheer administrative diligence of Sumer. They logged everything: contracts, astronomical observations, hymns to the pantheon, and even precise inventories of grain and beer rations. If a civilization was capable of such granular record-keeping, how is it that the record of humanity's existence immediately prior to their tutelage is so suspiciously, so structurally sparse? It is as if a vast, complex novel had several hundred pages torn out, not carelessly but surgically, ensuring the subsequent chapters still made grammatical sense, yet fundamentally altering the entire arc of the story. This gap in the cuneiform, this intentional void, is the keyhole through which we must peer. The texts we analyze are not pristine, unadulterated eyewitness accounts. They are the edited memoirs of the conqueror, the narrative passed down by the very beings who established the framework of our recognized history. When we speak of the Anunnaki, we often focus on their technology, their need for gold, or their genetic modifications of Homo sapiens. But the deeper, more unsettling truth lies in their role as historical architects. They were not merely creators, they were editors of reality, tasked with ensuring that the burgeoning human consciousness understood its own lineage only through the lens they provided. To accept this premise requires confronting the unnerving possibility of cyclical amnesia, a recurring pattern where advanced knowledge is systematically erased, often facilitated by catastrophic global events, yet perhaps more chillingly encouraged by calculated intervention. Think of the colossal structures left across the globe, monuments like Göbekli Tepe or the megaliths of the Andes that predate the established timelines and defy conventional explanation of early human capability. These sites are not just architectural puzzles, they are markers of an intelligence that possessed sophisticated astronomical and engineering knowledge that, according to the official Sumerian accounts established by the Anunnaki, should not have existed until they, the divine bringers of knowledge, bestowed it upon us. The suspicion grows when we compare the detailed accounts of the Anunnaki's operational structure, the Igigi, the Abgal, the hierarchy of the ruling council, with the frustrating vagueness surrounding the true nature of their planet, Nibiru, beyond its elliptical orbit. We know their ranks, their quarrels, their thirst for shining metal, but the origins of their own civilization, the ultimate source of their incredible longevity and mastery of matter, remains frustratingly elusive in the texts they sanctioned. They gave us the myth of the Tablet of Destinies, a symbol of ultimate control over fate, yet the question remains, whose destiny were they truly controlling, and what preceding destinies did they attempt to erase? If we look closely at the earliest references before the consolidation of the great temples dedicated to Enlil and Enki, there are faint echoes of an even older understanding, a spirituality less focused on subservience and more on cosmic alignment. These are the whispers of the inheritance, the subtle knowledge encoded in the foundational myths that the Anunnaki could not fully excise, only overlay. They could change the names of the gods and the rituals of devotion, but they struggled to fully scrub the innate memory of the cycles, the astronomical signs, and the deeper understanding of energy that permeated the pre-Sumerian mindset. This is where the detective work becomes most intense, tracing the linguistic and symbolic remnants that survived the intellectual purging. It requires sustained, deep reflection to penetrate this veil of engineered history. We must look beyond the compelling drama of the creation myths and ask, if the Anunnaki were so powerful, why did they need to hide anything at all? The answer may lie in their own vulnerability, perhaps a recognition that the human capacity for rapid adaptation and remembrance, though slow by their standards, represented a long-term threat to their generational control. Their lifespan, stretching across millennia, allowed them to view human history not as a continuous line, but as manageable, ephemeral cycles. To them, wiping the memory slate clean every few thousand years was merely a matter of planetary housekeeping. And if this investigation resonates with you, if the very concept of a historical suppression stirs a primal curiosity within your understanding of the past, then I encourage you to participate in this shared archaeological excavation. This complex tapestry of ancient knowledge demands not just passive viewing, but active contemplation. Press the like button, not simply to register appreciation, but as a symbolic gesture of alignment, a recognition that the pursuit of this concealed truth requires collective attention. And if you feel the weight of this forgotten history pressing upon you, consider subscribing. By joining this community of observers, you ensure that the narrative continues to unfold, granting you access to the subsequent stages of this intricate investigation into the shadowed corridors of time. The act of suppressing history implies an underlying fear, a fear that what was hidden might one day return. And for the Anunnaki, who operated on vast astronomical timescales, this fear was inevitably tied to the concept of the return, the moment when celestial mechanics would bring Nibiru, and perhaps other influences, back into proximity with Earth, potentially reactivating dormant consciousnesses or genetic markers they had intended to neutralize. The secrecy, therefore, was a long-term protective measure, designed to ensure that when the next great cycle began, humanity would be spiritually and intellectually disarmed, incapable of recognizing the true nature of the events unfolding above them. This brings us to the subtle yet profound evidence of the observers, those enigmatic figures whispered about in texts predating the centralized Anunnaki cults. If the Anunnaki arrived to set up a mining operation and establish a subservient workforce, they must have had some prior intelligence regarding Earth's resources and biological potential. Who provided that intelligence? Were there advanced entities, perhaps precursors or reconnaissance teams, who monitored Earth during the epochs before the Great Deluge? The Sumerian tablets, in their earliest, most fragmented forms, sometimes hint at beings who were not gods nor men, but something in between, custodians who held the keys to the planetary cycles. The Anunnaki narrative, in its final polished form, conveniently merged these older independent figures into their own pantheon, or dismissed them entirely as primitive spirits, effectively erasing any alternate line of authority or inheritance. Imagine the psychological effort required to maintain this systemic forgetfulness. It wasn't enough to simply destroy texts. They had to reshape the human mind itself, inserting a new mythology that prioritized linear, easily manageable history over the chaotic, cyclical wisdom of the ancients. This manipulation was perhaps the most crucial element of the concealed past. They taught us to fear the unknown, to elevate them above all natural forces, and crucially, they taught us to stop looking backward with critical eyes. The success of their strategy is evident in the general complacency of modern archaeology, which often prefers to reinforce comfortable, established timelines rather than confront the uncomfortable paradoxes left by these megalithic lost civilizations. But the stone records, the foundational alignments of the earliest structures, these still speak, albeit in a language of geometry and silence. They bear the subtle sign, the indelible marker of a pre-existing cosmic awareness that resisted the Anunnaki's attempts at total intellectual conquest. These structures, aligned precisely to astronomical events thousands of years in the past, serve as an unwritten chronicle, a monument to the knowledge that was considered too dangerous to preserve. It's here, in the unwavering dedication of stone to star, that we find the evidence of what the Anunnaki truly sought to hide. The proof that we, as a species, were not merely recipients of civilization, but inheritors of a knowledge far grander and more complex than the edited mythology allows. The realization that the past is not just undiscovered but actively concealed transforms our inquiry from archaeology into profound self-recognition. We are beginning to perceive that the true secret was not who they were, but what we were before they arrived. And as we gather these fragments, the whispered names of the older gods, the impossible precision of ancient stonework, and the strange structural omissions in the Sumerian canon, the narrative arc swings violently from mere curiosity into unsettling inquietude. We are approaching the threshold of a gradual revelation, realizing that the Anunnaki's greatest fear was not that we would rebel against their authority, but that we would simply remember the sovereignty we once possessed. This remembrance, this retrieval of our forgotten inheritance, is the very thing that could trigger the closure of the cycle they established. If you have stayed with us through this unfolding narrative, if you feel the resonance of these ancient whispers in the quiet parts of your mind, then you are part of the small, dedicated group that understands the gravity of this research. To ensure this critical information reaches others who are ready to perceive the patterns, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Liking this video helps push the signal through the static of conventional thought. And if you wish to leave your mark upon this investigation, reflect deeply on the nature of the concealed past, and then comment below with the specific phrase, "The cycle continues." This acknowledgement reinforces our shared commitment to uncovering the truth. Our next step must inevitably lead us into the physical evidence of this intentional concealment, the anomalies in dating, the evidence of technological suppression, and the archaeological smoking gun that confirms the narrative tampering. Prepare yourself, for the deeper we look, the clearer the shadows become. What motive truly compels a civilization of godlike stature to meticulously erase the foundational chapters of the world they engineered? It is a silence so profound, so deliberate, that it cannot merely be attributed to the convenience of governance or the simplification of theology. If the Anunnaki desired absolute control over the burgeoning human species, a simple fiction would suffice. A sudden creation myth, perhaps, rather than the intricate, contradictory tapestry we find woven through the Sumerian tablets, replete with inexplicable gaps and abrupt transitions. The true secret, the one that necessitated such an aggressive act of historical sterilization, must relate not to our weakness, but to their own fundamental vulnerability. We peer into the cuneiform, and what we find is not simply a record of events, but a highly effective architecture of historical forgetfulness. The Great Flood, the Amanishag, as it appears in the oldest whispers, functions less as a singular catastrophe and more as a conceptual guillotine, cleanly severing the recorded past from the manageable present. Everything preceding that epoch, the long, impossibly extended reigns of the pre-Diluvian kings, the nature of the existence that demanded such longevity, and the precise cosmological trigger for the deluge, is rendered inaccessible, relegated to the realm of mythic hyperbole. The numbers themselves scream the deception. Reigns lasting tens of thousands of years suddenly collapse into realistic human lifespans after the flood. This is not simply hyperbolic poetry. It is a clear editorial decision, marking the point where the masters decided the truth of cyclical time and inherent disaster had to be buried beneath the silt of history. This hidden history, the one the Anunnaki attempted to suppress, was likely the blueprint for their own mortality and the evidence of their own failed ventures. They arrived on Earth, as the narratives suggest, primarily to extract resources and establish a base of operations. They were observers and exploiters, yes, but not necessarily eternal or invulnerable. What if the pre-flood world, that forgotten epoch of advanced knowledge supposedly ruled by them, ended not through a punishment inflicted upon rebellious humans, but through a failure of the cosmic defense mechanisms they themselves were reliant upon? The Sumerian text, when read without the filter of theological interpretation, implies a sudden, brutal loss of control over elemental forces. A cyclical event tied to the precession of the equinoxes or the orbital mechanics of their own home. Nibiru, they hid the past because the past held the sign of the future, a future they feared and could not prevent. By deleting the pre-Diluvian heritage, the Anunnaki effectively guaranteed that the subsequent generations, humanity post-flood, would view them as monolithic, immortal creators rather than advanced beings subject to the same cosmic dictates and forces that governed the rise and fall of celestial bodies. If the early texts revealed that the gods themselves had been caught off guard, forced to flee, or watch their entire infrastructure crumble, then the moral authority they sought to establish over their new human workforce would instantly dissolve. The suppression, therefore, was a self-preservation mechanism, ensuring that humanity would never seek the knowledge or technology that might reveal the weakness of their masters, nor would they recognize the recurring patterns that precede catastrophic civilizational collapse. We are, in essence, the inhabitants of a quarantined world, deliberately isolated from the historical evidence of natural cycles that threaten even the most technologically advanced civilizations. The remaining fragments of text, those brief cryptic references to technologies that defy post-flood development, references to the me, the divine ordinances often described in near-technological terms, these are the cracks in the dam of historical suppression. They are the linguistic ghosts of a vibrant, complex reality that existed before the mandated cultural amnesia took hold. And if we look closely at how the texts describe the aftermath of the flood, we see not triumphal reconstruction, but an almost frantic reorganization. There is a palpable sense of urgency, an effort to restart the engine of civilization while erasing the memory of the catastrophic failure that necessitated the reboot. This journey into the suppressed archives of Sumer is deeply challenging, demanding not just historical recognition, but an uncomfortable psychological commitment. It requires us to abandon the comfort of linear history and accept the dizzying possibility of vast, repeating cycles of ascension and oblivion. If you are following this intricate thread, this shadow history that hides within the very foundations of human literacy, I encourage you to pause for a moment and consider the weight of this implication. If these cycles are real, then understanding the mechanism they tried to hide becomes paramount to our own survival. To explore these depths and to help uncover these crucial layers of meaning, please take a moment to signal your engagement by leaving a like on this video and subscribing to ensure you do not lose the trail of these ongoing discoveries. Your reflection is not merely passive viewing. It is an active participation in challenging the historical narrative that was imposed upon us millennia ago. The deepest mystery resides not in what was hidden, but who, in the Anunnaki ranks, decided what scraps of truth should remain. The schism between Enlil and Enki, the perennial conflict documented in multiple Sumerian accounts, moves beyond a mere sibling rivalry. It suggests an ideological war over the human project. While Enlil appears consistently committed to the complete eradication or radical containment of humanity, reflecting the fear of the cyclical threat returning, Enki often acts as the patron and preserver, sometimes even the deliberate leaker of essential knowledge. The tablets detailing the construction of Eridu and the handing down of the Mi seem to bear the fingerprint of this dissenting faction. It is plausible that the tablets that survive today, the very ones revealing the inconsistencies, were intentionally curated or preserved by those who believed humanity deserved a chance to remember the heritage that was stripped away, perhaps as a failsafe against the eventual return of the overwhelming cosmic force. This surviving literature, therefore, is not a unified account. It is a battleground of memory. The suppressed information likely pertained to specific astronomical coordinates, geological weaknesses of the Earth, and perhaps even the energy source used by the Anunnaki, details that could empower a burgeoning human civilization, but also expose the vulnerabilities of their masters. Imagine holding a clay tablet that not only tells you the history of the world, but through cryptic equations and celestial mappings, also tells you the precise time and location of the next inevitable collapse. That knowledge is power beyond measure, and it is the knowledge that had to be driven into the collective consciousness of oblivion. The sheer volume of resources and effort dedicated to maintaining this global veil of ignorance is itself a testament to the magnitude of the threat. Why else expend such energy unless the hidden information possessed the potential to fundamentally alter the power dynamic between maker and made? We are left with fragments, the whispered names of forgotten cities, the impossible lengths of lives before the deluge, the sudden, sharp shift in the relationship between man and God. These fragments function as deliberate breadcrumbs, scattered perhaps by Enki's lineage, or simply left behind in the chaotic rush to rebuild civilization in Mesopotamia. They are silent witnesses to the greatest act of historical censorship ever executed, an attempt to erase the cosmic periodicity of destruction and renewal. But history, when truly suppressed, rarely stays buried. It tends to re-emerge in unexpected ways, disguised in later myths, encoded in rituals, or manifesting in the deep, unshakable intuition felt by modern observers that something vital has been omitted from the official record. The Sumerian accounts are the first signpost on the path back to the truth, forcing us to ask if the Anunnaki feared the recurrence of an event so greatly that they erased the memory of it. What sign are the remaining observers within their own ranks waiting for now? What celestial mechanism are they quietly monitoring, knowing that the hidden history they failed to fully bury will soon become the essential guidebook for human survival when the cycle inevitably completes its rotation? This compels us to proceed with caution and heightened attention through the remaining cuneiform testimony. The next step is to synthesize the disparate fragments of the surviving texts and identify the specific lexicon used by the Anunnaki to describe the moment of cosmic danger. We must decode the warnings that Enki inscribed into the very fabric of early Sumerian culture, the warnings that tell us precisely what to watch for in the celestial dome. This is not mere storytelling, it is a foundational investigation into our inherited amnesia. If you have followed this difficult path and stayed until this very moment, recognizing the gravity of what is at stake, you are an essential part of this discovery. To ensure you receive the next crucial part of this investigation as we decode the celestial sign the Anunnaki sought to conceal, please subscribe to the channel now. If this analysis of suppressed history resonates with your own inner search for truth, signal that connection by pressing the like button. And to solidify your place in this dialogue, comment below with the specific phrase, "The cycle must not be forgotten." Stay with us as we continue to unlock the layers of the past that were intended to remain forever sealed. Does the past truly disappear, or is it merely sequestered, carefully catalogued and placed just beyond the veil of common sight? We continue our reflection, gazing into the cracked clay mirrors of Sumer, where the answers we seek are wrapped not in silence, but in a carefully constructed noise. A massive, overwhelming volume of information designed to bury the few, critical fragments of truth. It is a subtle difference, yet one that holds the entire cosmic narrative captive. The texts, voluminous and repetitive in their praise of the dominant deities and their immediate dominion over human affairs, often feel less like historical accounts and more like mandated declarations of divine corporate structure. The uneasiness truly begins when we recognize this pattern of overemphasis. Why dedicate so much detail to the logistics of gold mining and the hierarchy of the Anunnaki leadership, Enlil, Enki, Ninhursag, while leaving massive, epoch-defining voids immediately preceding their established reign? The gradual recognition dawning upon us, derived from comparing the fragmented pre-Diluvian king lists with the mythological narratives, is that the Anunnaki did not simply hide a piece of history. They fundamentally rewrote the operational manual of reality for the burgeoning human species. They established a temporal linearity, a fixed sense of cause and effect leading directly back to their arrival, thus eliminating the possibility of recognizing any significant pre-existing civilization or influence that might challenge their absolute authority. This rewriting wasn't just about political power, it was about managing human consciousness itself. If humanity knew it possessed a deeper intrinsic heritage, a connection to the cosmic forces, perhaps independent of the newcomers from Nibiru, the entire system of servitude, the very structure of the human experiment, would immediately collapse. We must consider the implication of genetic tampering not just on a biological level, creating the Lulu Amelu, the mixed worker, but on a mnemonic level. Was the modification designed not only to make us physically compliant and industrious, but also to install a systemic cultural amnesia? Think of it as a hard reset, wiping the core drive clean save for the essential operating system required for labor and obedience. The Sumerian texts, when viewed through this lens of enforced forgetfulness, become profoundly tragic. They are the echoes of a deep trauma, the subconscious residue of a memory that cannot fully articulate itself because the language of that memory was physically excised. The scribes who painstakingly pressed their reeds into the wet clay were, perhaps unknowingly, recording the very parameters of the prison, reinforcing the concept that the universe began with the Anunnaki descending in their fiery boats, and that history was merely the consequence of their decisions. Yet within the vast archives of this controlled narrative, the forbidden truth, like water finding a crack, begins to seep through. It emerges in the strange, defiant narrative of the Igigi, the Watchers, who refused the heavy manual labor imposed by Enlil's regime and whose subsequent rebellion demanded the creation of the human worker. The official story portrays the Igigi's defiance as a mere labor dispute, an internal political conflict. But what if the Igigi's true rebellion was intellectual? What if they were the faction of the Anunnaki who recognized the deep moral and cosmic violation inherent in the enforced amnesia and the manipulation of the nascent human mind? Their punishment was swift and brutal, their names often marginalized or demonized in the mainstream Sumerian pantheon, precisely because they represented the inconvenient truth that not all of the celestial visitors agreed with the systematic obfuscation of human heritage. The silence surrounding their fate post-rebellion is perhaps the loudest indication of the hidden history. This is the point where the strangeness truly gives way to an unsettling recognition. The past the Anunnaki tried to hide wasn't just a prior human civilization. It was the mechanism of time itself and the full extent of the human spiritual capacity. They exchanged the vast, cyclical understanding of time, where great ages rise and fall, and knowledge is eternally reborn, for a rigid, linear progression, positioning themselves eternally at the apex of the evolutionary ladder. This deliberate alteration means that every cyclical concept we encounter in subsequent mythologies, the idea of a great flood purifying the world for a new start, the recurrent belief in a golden age waiting to return, are perhaps not merely abstract poetic concepts, but residual, stubbornly persistent echoes of the ancient cosmic timetable that the Anunnaki system was designed to suppress. If you find these fragments resonating within your own deep reflection, if the idea of this systemic, imposed amnesia stirs a feeling of unease that demands intellectual attention, perhaps the collective consciousness is ready to piece together these fragments. Take a moment, step outside the linear narrative, and consider what crucial element of your own history, if revealed, would fundamentally shift your understanding of reality. This journey of uncovering requires patience, precision, and a willingness to reflect deeply on the subtle clues left behind by those long-forgotten scribes. If this deep dive into the hidden layers of history captivates your understanding, consider sharing your thoughts and becoming a part of this growing body of shared inquiry by offering your insights below. It is through this collaborative reflection that the most profound insights often surface, illuminating the obscured path. The architecture of the Sumerian city-states themselves speaks to this engineered forgetting. The towering ziggurats, magnificent monuments dedicated to the ruling Anunnaki deities, were not merely temples. They were physical affirmations of the imposed hierarchy, massive structural anchors enforcing the linear timeline. They stood as visible, undeniable proof that the gods were up there, separate and distant, demanding reverence and resource allocation. Yet if we look closely at the older foundations, the pre-Sumerian layers hinted at by archaeologists, we find whispers of construction methods and astronomical alignments that do not strictly adhere to the established Anunnaki protocols. These subtle deviations suggest a foundational layer of knowledge, perhaps astronomical or geometric, that predates the intervention, a subterranean stream of wisdom that the architects of the new regime had to consciously pave over or recontextualize. The profound question emerges: were the early scribes, the first custodians of the written word, merely puppets, or were they conscious archivists of the hidden truth? There is a profound difference between being forced to record a history and being forced to selectively omit one. The very act of writing, the creation of cuneiform, which is incredibly complex and nuanced, requires immense intellectual capacity. It strains credulity to believe that the intellectual elite of Sumer were entirely ignorant of the contradictions inherent in the texts they were copying day after day, cycle after cycle. Instead, the most compelling interpretation suggests a quiet intellectual resistance, a deliberate seeding of cryptic contradictions, numerical anomalies, and unusual linguistic keys that centuries later might unlock the full narrative for those with the capacity to truly read between the lines of the official doctrine. These scribes, observing the cycles of control and the periodic cleanup operations undertaken by the dominant faction, perhaps understood that stone and clay provided the only reliable medium for transmitting truths that the Anunnaki actively sought to erase. They became the first true secret society, preserving the heritage not in explicit statements, but in coded omissions. This realization brings us to the core issue of Anunnaki motivation. If their technological superiority was so absolute, why bother with such elaborate acts of obfuscation? The answer lies not in their strength, but in their deep-seated insecurity regarding the cosmic cycles. They knew that their presence on Earth was temporary, tied to the return of their homeworld, Nibiru. Their goal, therefore, was not eternal dominion, but effective resource extraction and control during their limited window of influence. The hidden past, the true history of Earth and humanity, represented an existential risk because it contained the potential for human self-realization, a quickening of consciousness that could disrupt the entire labor operation before Nibiru's return. The manipulation of human history was a massive, planetary-scale quarantine effort designed to keep humanity intellectually dormant until the harvest was complete and the Watchers had departed. They tried to hide the true source code of human potential, the keys to unlock what was achieved before the flood and before their total hegemony. And what about the concept of the return itself? In Sumerian cosmology, the cyclical appearance and disappearance of celestial bodies governed destiny. If the Anunnaki were so focused on establishing a linear, human-centric timeline, how did they manage the inevitable terror that must have accompanied the knowledge of their own cyclical departure and return? The terror of accountability. When Nibiru returns, who will judge their actions? The texts subtly hint that the Anunnaki themselves were divided, not only by the Igigi rebellion, but by deep philosophical differences concerning the treatment of the primitive species they had modified. These internal feuds, sometimes masked as divine rivalries, like the Enlil-Enki conflicts, were possibly symptomatic of a deeper anxiety. The fear that the original mandate for intervening on Earth had been corrupted, and that the hidden past they sought to bury was not just history, but evidence that would condemn them upon the inevitable cosmic audit. The fragments we are assembling suggest a terrifying prospect, that human history, as widely accepted today, is merely a post-operative report, sanitizing the true, messy, and ethically questionable procedures that established our modern civilization. We are reading the heavily edited memoir of the observer, while the actual laboratory notes remain locked away. The sheer weight of this potential historical lie, this monumental act of universal gaslighting, requires us to reconsider every single piece of ancient wisdom we encounter. Was Gilgamesh's search for immortality truly just a heroic quest? Or was it a desperate, residual memory of a time when the human lifespan and potential were far grander before the Anunnaki limitations were strictly enforced? Was the paradise of Dilmun, often described as a pure, bright land before the Great Conflict, a genuine geographical location or a mythological placeholder for the era they tried to obliterate? The true hidden past is not merely a collection of forgotten facts, but a blueprint of the unlimited human, and the Anunnaki's concerted effort to ensure that blueprint remained lost in the sands of time, buried under the bureaucratic clay of their own carefully curated history. This persistent shadow of potential, this ephemeral echo of greater knowledge, continues to pull us forward, demanding that we dedicate our full attention to what remains unsaid in the spaces between the cuneiform signs. If this exploration has deepened your curiosity, if you feel the unsettling connection to these ancient mysteries and are determined to stay on this difficult path of truth-seeking, I urge you to recognize the value of this shared endeavor. To ensure you do not miss the further revelations contained in the next part of this investigation, and to visually confirm your place amongst those dedicated to uncovering the past the Anunnaki tried to hide, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel now. Like this video, if the concept of systematic historical amnesia resonates with your understanding of the world. And to anchor this specific insight, let the collective reflection begin by commenting below the phrase, "The Watcher's Warning." Only by acknowledging the subtle acts of resistance recorded in the deepest texts can we hope to fully decode the hidden agenda. Do not let the dense nature of this history deter you. This is precisely the level of detail required to unearth truths buried for millennia. We are only halfway through this profound journey, and the most critical evidence, the true nature of the great signal that announces the end of their suppression, awaits us in the coming parts. Prepare your mind for the next stage of recognition, which will appear on your screen now. The true silence of history is not the absence of sound, but the careful orchestration of what we are allowed to hear and what we are compelled to forget. We often assume that the gaps in the Sumerian record are simply due to the ravages of time, to the fragility of clay and the attrition of forgotten libraries swallowed by the desert sands. But what if that forgetfulness was engineered? What if the destruction of certain archives, the meticulous rewriting of king lists, and the strange, sudden shifts in astronomical observation were not accidents of chronology, but the deliberate work of the Anunnaki themselves, acting as censors of a timeline they desperately needed to control? The surviving texts, the ones that whisper from the shadowed archives, suggest precisely this: a systematic campaign of historical management executed by an echelon of powerful extraterrestrial overseers who understood that control over the past is the ultimate key to controlling the future. They sought not merely to rule over humanity, but to define humanity's very concept of time and origin. This endeavor to conceal was rooted in a profound practical necessity: protecting the narrative of their own divinity. To maintain their status as uncontested creators and deities, the true nature of their vulnerability, their limitations, and, most critically, the existence of past failures had to be expunged entirely. We discussed the sheer industrial motive, the critical need for gold to save Nibiru, but the secret knowledge hidden in the deepest layers of the cuneiform goes far beyond metallurgy and labor quotas. It speaks to the uncomfortable truth that the Anunnaki, despite their advanced science, were not perfect gods, and that the creation of the Lulu Amelu, the modern working human, was not their first, or even their second, attempt at solving their labor crisis. The concealed records detail the weight of the cycles, showing that terrestrial civilization has not merely suffered random catastrophes, but has been deliberately pruned and reset multiple times. These cycles were tied intrinsically to the orbital mechanics of their own planet, Nibiru, yet the Sumerian priests were taught only to observe the terrestrial calendar, blind to the grand astronomical clock that governed their masters' returns and departures. The texts reveal a chilling pattern. The Anunnaki would return, exploit, manipulate the climate, often unintentionally, sometimes intentionally for strategic purposes, and then, facing a shift in their own orbital period, they would initiate a cleansing event, often exploiting natural disasters like great floods, to ensure the clean sweep of any inconvenient historical residue left behind from the previous age. The goal was to ensure that when they returned, perhaps millennia later, the new generation of humans would have no memory of the previous cycles, accepting their current overlords as the original and only divine architects. This cyclical amnesia is the core of the hidden secret. Yet to truly grapple with this deep structure of controlled history, we must pause, look inward, and measure our own willingness to accept this complexity. If history itself is a redacted document, what tools do we use to find the truth? As we delve deeper into the nature of these concealed records, I encourage you to pause, to breathe, and to share your deepest initial thoughts in the comments below. Use a single word or a phrase, perhaps controlled cycles, to mark your presence in this journey of understanding. The deeper we go, the more critical it is that we engage our minds fully, allowing the elegance of the data to speak for itself. If you find value in this unfolding revelation and wish to continue this investigation alongside us, please consider subscribing and tapping the like button. Your engagement is the quiet affirmation that these hidden truths deserve to be seen, not just by us, but by all those who seek to understand the true origins of the cosmos and our place within it. The most disturbing revelation within these suppressed tablets concerns the echoes of the forgotten progeny. The standard narrative, the one taught and sanctioned by Enki and Enlil, focuses on the successful genetic manipulation that resulted in modern humanity, strong enough to mine, pliable enough to obey. But the older, buried fragments speak of creatures that predate the final, successful model. These were not simply evolutionary steps, but distinct prototypes, the failed experiments that the Anunnaki deemed too volatile, too intellectually developed, or paradoxically, too physically fragile for the grueling labor required. These early, discarded lines of proto-humans possessed certain spiritual or cognitive faculties that, while potentially desirable for advanced civilization, were fundamentally incompatible with the slave race. They retained too much memory of the previous cycle, perhaps, or developed too rapidly a capacity for abstract thought that bordered on rivalry with their creators. The texts describe the horrific necessity of their disposal, a process that was brutal, comprehensive, and meticulously planned to ensure that no genetic or historical trace remained to corrupt the current lineage. This level of intentional, genocidal erasure for the sake of narrative control is the true darkness the Anunnaki sought to hide. This brings us to the management of memory itself. How does one erase the memory of an entire civilization? It's more than just destroying texts. It involves manipulating the physical landscape and, most subtly, the astronomical observations. The Anunnaki strategically altered certain megalithic sites that predated their own arrival or were built by the forgotten progeny, to align with new simplified celestial markers, thereby hijacking the true significance of ancient sky-watching traditions. By changing the orientation of certain temples or redefining key constellations, they shifted the focus of human attention away from the grander, cyclical alignments that revealed Nibiru's true path and the longer cosmic timeline. They essentially put humanity in a temporal cage, limiting our understanding of history to the short span between Anunnaki visits, thereby solidifying the myth that human history began only when they graced us with civilization. The subtle reorientation of the stars became a silent, ever-present propaganda tool, ensuring human memory never stretched beyond the limits set by the visitors from the sky. And why this extreme effort? It circles back to the true cost of gold. While the metal was essential for Nibiru's atmosphere, the real cost was the accelerated moral decay of the Anunnaki leadership, particularly those stationed on Earth for extended periods. The texts indicate a growing factionalism among them, specifically a deep division over the ethical justification of their methods. Enki, often portrayed as the more sympathetic scientist, found himself in opposition to the increasingly pragmatic and ruthless approach of leaders like Enlil. The hidden narrative suggests that the necessity of the gold became a convenient excuse for absolute domination, blurring the line between salvation and tyranny. The concealment of history became necessary not just to manage the slaves, but to manage the dissent within the Anunnaki ranks. If the human laborers knew their creation was based on discarded attempts and managed amnesia, rebellion was inevitable. If the Anunnaki lower castes, the Igigi, understood the full moral toll, their loyalty might falter, a fear that later led to the Great Igigi Rebellion described in other sources. The ultimate goal of this historical obfuscation was the perpetuation of the imperfection of the blueprint. The human design, the final version that survived, was engineered with crucial limitations. It was not built for maximum longevity or limitless knowledge, traits that were possessed by the Anunnaki themselves. Instead, our design incorporated a specific biological veil that restricted full access to cosmic consciousness and limited our lifespan significantly. This was a critical feature, not a bug. If humans lived for thousands of years, their cumulative memory would eventually pierce the historical censorship imposed by the Anunnaki. By limiting our lifespan to a few short decades, the secrets of the previous cycles would literally die with the generation that witnessed them, ensuring a continuous, fresh slate of compliant workers every century. This engineered obsolescence is the ultimate evidence of the Anunnaki's desire to hide the past. They built the very mechanism of forgetfulness into our DNA. Yet, there were subtle counter-movements. The texts hint at a deeper, older mission, suggesting that the Anunnaki originally came as the observers who became architects, initially intending perhaps only to monitor the development of Earth life. However, the existential crisis of Nibiru forced a radical shift from objective observation to desperate intervention and ultimately self-proclaimed divinity. This shift in role led to a psychological schism. They started believing their own revised history. The concealed records detail the internal struggle of those who remembered the original mandate, the commitment to non-interference, versus the practical necessity of survival. This struggle manifested in the careful, almost cryptic preservation of some true knowledge, encoded in complex mythological structures and highly protected priestly lineages, ensuring that the seed of the truth might survive the great cleansing events, awaiting a time when humanity might be ready to rediscover its true, unrestricted potential. This knowledge was hidden not from humanity universally, but for a specific, dedicated lineage of initiates, the keepers of the secret who ensured the truth of the controlled cycles was never entirely lost. The terrifying urgency driving the Anunnaki's need to hide the past is inextricably linked to the countdown of the unfolding of the Great Year. Sumerian cosmology, when decoded through the concealed astronomical texts, reveals that the orbital period of Nibiru aligns with major galactic events, often coinciding with periods of intense terrestrial shift. The Anunnaki feared the end of their current management cycle because it was predicted to align with a major planetary realignment, a moment of cosmic clarity where the veil between dimensions and between controlled history and true history would naturally thin. The hidden texts function as both historical record and esoteric prophecy, warning the initiated that the current era is reaching its chronological apex, a moment when the conditions that allowed the Anunnaki's rule, specifically the engineered forgetfulness, will naturally erode. They feared the moment Nibiru's return would coincide not with ignorant laborers, but with a technologically or spiritually reawakened humanity, capable of recognizing them not as gods, but as transient, opportunistic visitors whose mandate had long expired. This fear explains the silence of the seven sages. These legendary figures, the Apkallu, were often portrayed as teachers of civilization, bringing craft and knowledge to mankind. However, the concealed records suggest that the most ancient of the sages were actually Anunnaki, or their immediate, highly specialized progeny who harbored deep reservations about the systematic cover-up. They were the dissenters who utilized their educational role to subtly embed truthful anomalies into the very fabric of Sumerian society. Hints about previous disasters, coded warnings about the cyclical nature of power, and veiled instructions on how to track the true celestial markers ignored by the mainstream priesthood. Their silence was their most powerful weapon. By not openly challenging the system, but by carefully depositing seeds of truth, they ensured that the critical information about the past, and thus the future, remained just below the surface, awaiting its eventual discovery. All these hidden threads, the discarded prototypes, the managed cycles, the engineered lifespan, and the descent of the sages, converge on a single terrifying point: the impending return. The Sumerian texts reveal the past that the Anunnaki hid, but in doing so, they also reveal the future they fear. The deepest secrets are not about what happened, but about when it happens again. The full realization of this cyclical pattern demands absolute focus. This profound, sweeping narrative of history, controlled and history suppressed, is critical to understanding our current epoch. If you have been with us through this deep dive into the concealed records, and if you feel the weight of these historical realities settling upon your understanding, your commitment is truly valued. To acknowledge the depth of this shared investigation, please take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. Liking this video helps ensure this hidden knowledge reaches others who are ready to perceive the true scope of history. And as a final marker for this part of our journey, please comment below with the phrase, "The veil is thinning." This phrase signifies your recognition of the critical moment we are approaching. Do not let this narrative end here. The most complex and revelatory sections of the Sumerian texts, detailing the final plans of the Anunnaki before their last major departure, await us in the next part. Click the video on your screen now to continue peeling back the layers of historical deception and uncover the full warning encoded in the ancient clay. What if the greatest historical catastrophe was not the cataclysm itself, but the deliberate, crushing silence that followed it? We have been tracing the threads of Sumerian revelation, the whispers of cuneiform pressed into clay, yet every step closer to the origin of the Anunnaki's operation brings us face to face with an unnerving void, a monumental gap in human history that feels surgically precise. It is a terrifying realization to contemplate that the history we have accepted as the foundation of civilization might merely be the second chapter, carefully edited and sanctioned by those who sought to establish dominance through manufactured ignorance. The profound challenge presented by the deeper tablets, those hidden in the deepest layers of the temple archives, is that they do not just describe the Anunnaki arriving and starting their work. They describe the Anunnaki attempting to overwrite a preceding human epoch. The narrative crafted and propagated after the Great Flood, the deluge that seems to punctuate and reset nearly every mythology across the globe, served not only as a convenient wiping away of physical evidence, but critically as a mental eraser. The Anunnaki established their timeline, the creation of the Adamu, the subsequent labor, the limited sharing of knowledge, as the genesis of all things recognizable to humankind. If the texts, however, reveal a sophisticated, perhaps naturally evolved proto-humanity existing prior to the genetic modification, possessing astronomy, agriculture, and self-governance, then the Anunnaki's claim to be the sole architects of civilization instantly dissolves. The true nature of their deception was not merely demanding gold, but demanding that humanity accept its current, limited state as its birthright, its natural starting point. They enforced a collective amnesia, a psychological subjugation far more effective than any physical chain. We are left asking, What kind of sophisticated knowledge could a pre-Anunnaki civilization possess that would so fundamentally threaten the agenda of advanced cosmic visitors? It must have been knowledge that could prove the Anunnaki were not gods, not benevolent creators, but merely technologically advanced colonists leveraging a desperate situation. Consider the meticulousness required to execute this erasure. It wasn't enough to destroy cities, they had to control the subsequent documentation, meticulously editing oral traditions and ensuring that the newly installed priestly castes, the intermediaries between humanity and the gods, only disseminated the authorized version of events. This orchestrated historical vacuum is what these recently unearthed, or perhaps more accurately, rediscovered Sumerian texts are beginning to fill. They speak in hushed, fragmented tones of the long count, of cycles of time that predate the arrival of the Nibiruan contingent, hinting at observation posts, silent watchers, and guardians of the planet who existed long before Enki and Enlil set foot on Eridu. If this level of detail resonates, if the idea of a fabricated history designed to keep us intellectually subservient feels disturbingly possible, then I encourage you to pause for a moment. Share your deep thoughts in the comments below. Reflect on what this forced amnesia means for our modern understanding of identity, and join the journey by liking this video and subscribing, allowing us to continue this meticulous reconstruction of the past that was hidden. The key to understanding the sheer magnitude of this cover-up lies in grasping the Anunnaki's long-term objective, which was intrinsically tied to their cyclical orbital journey. They were not seeking a quick raid. They were establishing a long-term, self-sustaining operation designed to function over colossal spans of time, the duration between their planet's closest approaches. To ensure the continuity of resource extraction and the stability of the labor force, any element that could introduce chaos or challenge their authority had to be purged. The greatest source of resistance is not physical, it is historical self-awareness. If the laborers knew they had once been free, that they had once interacted with the cosmos or possessed technologies of their own, the fragile structure of divine obedience would collapse. These deeper texts detail the enforcement of what we might call the orbital imperative. When the time approached for the Anunnaki leadership to return to their home world, they needed to leave behind a perfectly stable, self-perpetuating system. This stability required the elimination of all records, symbols, and artifacts belonging to the first experiment, the society that existed before the modified Adamu. The narrative of Eden and the subsequent fall, which permeates the earliest codified myths, takes on a chilling new significance. Was the fall truly a moral failing, or was it simply humanity reclaiming a piece of forbidden knowledge that proved their true lineage and negated the Anunnaki's divine right to rule? The texts suggest the latter, describing how certain elements among the Anunnaki themselves, the observers and dissenting voices, attempted to preserve fragments of the true historical lineage, encrypting them within cultural practices, monuments, and astronomical calculations. These fragments are the silent witnesses to the greater lie. This leads us to the concept of the Great Reset. The flood was not simply an environmental disaster. The Sumerian accounts portray it as a scheduled event, potentially aggravated by the approaching celestial body, but leveraged fully by the Anunnaki hierarchy to purge the globe. Imagine the scale of documentation destruction required. The physical scrolls, the clay tablets, the architectural markers, the oral history carriers, all wiped out by a single terrifying wave. The post-diluvian world was a blank slate, fertile ground for the seeding of a new controlled narrative. When they began the reconstruction, the first thing they rebuilt was not infrastructure, but mythology. The pantheon of gods, their hierarchies, their capriciousness, and their demands were meticulously established to reflect the corporate and military structure of the Anunnaki itself. ensuring that servitude felt like sacred duty. Yet, as we excavate the subterranean layers of the past, the faint but undeniable outlines of that pre-Diluvian world begin to emerge from the silence. These accounts mention technologies that defy our current understanding of the ancient world, machines that accessed subterranean resources, communication methods that spanned vast distances, and a spiritual understanding of cosmic energy that the Anunnaki seem particularly eager to suppress. This suggests that the ancient knowledge they sought to hide was not just about who we were, but what we were capable of when left to our own developmental trajectory. They didn't just want workers, they wanted to eliminate the competition, or at least the potential for future competition, ensuring that the new human model, the Adamu, remained perpetually distracted by the immediate needs of survival and the endless appeasement of the seemingly omnipotent deities. The deeper we delve into the structure of the recovered texts, the more we recognize the strategic genius behind the concealment. It wasn't a single lie. It was a woven tapestry of distortions. They allowed just enough truth to filter through. The existence of the Anunnaki, the cities they built, the tools they brought, to satisfy the intellectual curiosity of the emerging scribal class. But they excised the foundational facts that would establish humanity's true seniority on this planet. It's a historical paradox. The records that confirm the gods' presence are abundant. The records that precede their presence are almost universally eradicated. Why leave any trace at all? Perhaps because the act of completely fabricating a history is too unstable. A small kernel of verifiable truth makes the surrounding distortion more palatable, more believable, and ultimately more enduring. The enduring question, echoing from the silent halls of forgotten temples, is whether the Anunnaki truly succeeded in their endeavor. Are we, the inheritors of this edited timeline, forever confined to the psychological boundaries they imposed? Or is the very act of recovering these fragmented tablets, piecing together the true chronology, a sign that the engineered amnesia is beginning to fail? The texts strongly imply that certain Anunnaki observers, those who disagreed with the severity of the intervention or the treatment of the native terrestrial species, established coded historical markers. These were intended to act as a temporal alarm clock designed to awaken the descendants when the next cycle or orbital return was imminent. They left breadcrumbs, not for immediate use, but for a distant future when the true owners of this planet might need to reclaim their historical sovereignty. If you have stayed with this journey, absorbing these difficult and complex concepts, you are demonstrating the very quality that the Anunnaki attempted to suppress: sustained, critical curiosity. This is the moment to internalize the weight of this investigation. We are not just reading ancient myths. We are participating in a profound archival recovery, lifting the veil of controlled history one fragment at a time. This requires focus and dedication. If this information has reshaped your perspective on human history and the nature of our origins, then ensure you are subscribed to the channel. That is how this research can continue to reach those who are ready to question the established narrative. Give the video a like to signal your engagement with these sensitive truths. And crucially, if you understand the gravity of what the surviving texts represent, comment the phrase, "The archive survives." This simple acknowledgement helps us track the dedicated observers among our community. The next part of this revelation will delve into the precise nature of the first experiment and what catastrophic information within it made the Anunnaki risk a global purge to bury it forever. Do not miss what is coming next. The hidden past is just beginning to emerge from the shadow. Was the greatest achievement of the Anunnaki not the creation of humanity itself, but the masterful engineering of our collective forgetfulness? We speak of hidden texts and suppressed histories, But we must pause and consider the sheer scale of the deception required to erase millennia of shared experience from the human mind. It is not merely a matter of scrolls buried beneath the sands or tablets shattered in ancient libraries. It is a structural fault line embedded deep within the bedrock of our modern perception, a cosmic chronology that feels profoundly incomplete, truncated precisely at the point where the presence of the advanced observers became inconvenient to their ongoing agenda. We look back through the fog of antiquity and see strange, sudden bursts of civilization: Sumer, the Indus Valley, Egypt, springing forth, seemingly fully formed, possessing astronomical knowledge and engineering prowess that modern scholarship still struggles to categorize logically. But what if the true trick was not the acceleration of our development, but the strategic deletion of the preceding eras, the slow epochs during which humanity understood its subordinate position, and perhaps even knew the true, unvarnished story of its genesis? The Sumerian tablets, especially those fragments that defy easy translation or canonical acceptance, suggest a history of repeated catastrophic resets, far beyond mere geological or climatic shifts. These were, perhaps, moments of deliberate narrative cleansing, orchestrated by those who held the levers of cosmic power and possessed the longevity to witness the full sweep of the millennia. For beings whose lifespans stretched into thousands of human years, the recorded memory of a few hundred human generations is a flickering candle easily snuffed out, or, more insidiously, a narrative easily edited. They did not simply destroy the evidence, they allowed certain truths to survive, the half-truths that suited their narrative of benevolence and divinity, while ensuring the disappearance of the operational specifics, the true nature of Nibiru, the details of the conflicts between Enlil and Enki, and crucially, the realization that humanity was not the ultimate goal, but rather the temporary means to an end. This engineered amnesia, this intellectual void, left precisely where uncomfortable truths should reside, is the very core of the historical silence that haunts our archaeology. When we read the Sumerian lexicon, deciphering the strange linguistic fingerprints left behind, we sense the presence of an alien grammar, a framework of understanding placed upon a nascent, innocent human consciousness. The words for God, ruler, heaven and earth, carry dual meanings, hints of technological superiority, misinterpreted as mystical omnipotence. And it is in these tiny linguistic ruptures, these semantic irregularities, that the hidden past begins to whisper back. It reveals that the suppression was not an event, but a continuous process, a slow-motion campaign to standardize human perception so that their temporary presence would solidify into perpetual myth. Now, if this narrative of profound structural deceit resonates with the deep, unspoken questions you carry about our origins, if you sense the echoes of a truth that history books conveniently skip over, then perhaps this is the time to deepen our shared investigation, to truly uncover the magnitude of what the Anunnaki tried to hide. We must ensure these ideas reach others who are also ready to question the official story. Take a moment, allow the weight of this information to settle, and consider subscribing to the channel. Your presence here, your commitment to listening and contemplating these challenging possibilities, is a crucial part of preserving the very history that was meant to be forgotten. If you find value in this dense exploration, please leave a like, as it helps connect us with others who recognize that the greatest secrets are often hidden in plain sight, encoded in the most ancient of texts. The ultimate safeguard for the Anunnaki's secrecy lay in the profound difference between their concept of time and ours. For us, 1,000 years is the sweep of history. For them, it was merely an operational phase, a budgetary cycle of the resource extraction project. Their control mechanisms were therefore tied not to human political shifts, but to cosmic constants, the grand cycle, the return of their planetary vessel, Nibiru, the very sign that reappears across multiple ancient cultures. The texts reveal that the hiding of the past was intrinsically linked to the predictability of the future. When the sign approaches, the memories stir. The ancient knowledge resurfaces, not because a new tablet is discovered, but because the very fabric of reality, tied to that cyclical return, begins to hum with dormant energy. The texts, therefore, are not just records. They are chronological markers, coded warnings meant to activate when the great orbital clock nears its alignment. This cyclical pattern explains why total erasure was unnecessary. Why bother eliminating every trace when the natural human tendency towards short-sightedness, coupled with recurring, controlled catastrophes, could handle the memory management? Each deluge, each widespread upheaval, natural or engineered, served as a convenient breakpoint, a perfect opportunity to reboot the operating system of human consciousness and install a slightly updated version of the accepted narrative, always maintaining the core fiction of divine, singular creation. But within the human psyche there remained an inherited trauma, a subconscious recognition of betrayal. This is why the myths persist, why the flood stories are global, why the images of flying machines and celestial battles remain stubbornly lodged in our collective dreamscape, defying all rational attempts to dismiss them as mere primitive imagination. These are not fables. They are the fragmented files of human memory, corrupted but not entirely destroyed, awaiting the key that unlocks the original encryption. The complexity of the hiding is further illuminated by recognizing the internal fissures within the Anunnaki hierarchy itself. The Sumerian tablets are clear. There was never a unified front. The conflicts between the factions of Enlil and Enki ensured that certain truths were leaked, certain safeguards established. Enki's lineage, often associated with the creation and subsequent protection of humanity, may have acted as the unwitting, or sometimes conscious, custodians of the real past. These watchers, observing from the fringes of the official narrative, subtly intervened, embedding clues within the very myths they helped construct. These clues, the detailed astronomical measurements, the precise genealogies that stretch back impossibly far, the explicit descriptions of non-human biology, were not placed there for the common man of the time. They were placed for the future, for a generation capable of decoding the metaphor, for us peering back across the chasm of time. Consider the profound paradox inherent in the Anunnaki project. To rule effectively, they required humanity to advance just enough to be useful, but not so much as to question the fundamental hierarchy. This required them to become masters of informational scarcity, allowing enough light to encourage growth, but always shrouding the source of that light in impenetrable mystery. The Sumerian texts, when viewed through this lens, become less about historical narrative and more about a strategic legal document, an ancient treaty outlining the terms of dominion, transcribed by the very beings who were bound by its rules, yet manipulated by its architects. They document the moment when the temporary role of humanity was reclassified as eternal servitude, and the true cost of civilization was silently levied upon our descendants. The deeper we delve into the nature of their long-term objectives, the clearer it becomes that the hiding of the past was about far more than preserving resources. It was about protecting the delicate balance of their own existence, tied to the distant orbit of Nibiru. If humanity were to fully realize its true potential, its cosmic inheritance, it might eventually challenge the cyclical return, disrupt the established power structure, and perhaps even understand the technology required to escape the constraints of this planetary experiment. The lie was necessary to maintain the status quo across vast stretches of time, ensuring that when the sign reappeared, humanity would be suitably ignorant, pliable, and ready to assume its designated role, whatever that final purpose might entail. The sheer exhaustion required to maintain this secret across thousands of years is almost unimaginable. Every myth reinforced, every contradictory artifact destroyed or misinterpreted, every historical timeline carefully pruned. It raises the unsettling question of who, if anyone, still maintains this vigil today. Are the hidden texts merely echoes of a past deception? Or are they vital intelligence reports about an ongoing operation? The Sumerian narrative forces us to confront the possibility that we are living within a controlled environment, a kind of historical simulation designed to facilitate the convenience of our ancient masters. The past they tried to hide is not just their history. It is the blueprint for our potential future, a future defined by either continued subservience or genuine self-sovereignty, predicated entirely on our ability to fully recognize the structure of the inherited lie. And as we stand now, peering into the fragmented mirror of Sumerian wisdom, we approach the threshold of understanding the full depth of that deception. The final acts of this ancient drama, the ultimate revelations regarding the Anunnaki's long-term exit strategy and the true purpose behind the selective breeding of Homo sapiens, lie just ahead in the final chapter of this exploration. The tablets provide not just a record of what happened, but a premonition of what must come when the cosmic alignment completes its cycle and the truth, hidden for so long, bursts forth into the full light of human consciousness. The greatest fear of the Anunnaki was not human rebellion, but human comprehension. If you have stayed with this narrative, traversing the fragmented timelines and decoding the linguistic scars left by the observers, you are among those who refuse to accept the official silence. You are dedicated to seeing the hidden tapestry woven back together, thread by painful thread. For those committed seekers of forbidden knowledge who have journeyed this far, please ensure you are subscribed to the channel. A simple click helps us continue this deep, slow investigation into the core mysteries of our civilization. If this segment has sparked a new understanding or confirmed an old suspicion, give us a like. And to mark your presence here, to signal your commitment to confronting the truth the Anunnaki tried to bury, please comment below with the phrase, "The cycle is turning." Your comment helps map the community of minds ready for the next level of revelation. We are now at the precipice of the final understanding, the moment when the Sumerian text yields its most dangerous secrets. I urge you to prepare your mind, for the final piece of this story, awaiting you on the screen now, reveals the ultimate objective of the Anunnaki and the profound immediate implications for our world today. Has the veil truly lifted, or have we simply glimpsed the edges of a darkness so profound that even the light of 1,000 suns could not fully pierce its density? This is the final question posed by the fragmented wisdom left behind on those clay tablets, the silent archives of a past the Anunnaki labored so meticulously to erase. We have traced the narrative threads of creation, manipulation, and the Great Flood, but the most unsettling revelation is not merely what they did, but the chilling sophistication of how they ensured the secret would remain buried, not just beneath the sand, but within the very architecture of human consciousness. The ultimate concealment was not of a timeline, but of the knowledge of our own potential, our divine, if genetically spliced, inheritance. The Sumerian text, in its last decipherable whispers, doesn't just reveal history, it provides the calculus of forgetting. They understood that cataclysm alone was insufficient to wipe the slate clean. Natural disasters could destroy cities, but memory, stored in myth and ritual, is far more resilient. Therefore, the cover-up required a deeper form of intervention, a restructuring of reality perception itself. Imagine the departure of the high echelon Anunnaki, not as an abandonment, but as a calculated retreat into observation, leaving behind cultural blueprints designed specifically to confuse, distract, and channel human energy away from self-discovery. These blueprints became the foundation for organized religion, hierarchical power structures, and the relentless focus on the material world. Systems engineered to keep the newly minted human species perpetually looking upward for salvation or downward for conflict, rather than inward for the truth of their genesis. The past they tried to hide was the simple, devastating fact that we were created as a means to an end, a sophisticated tool, but a tool nonetheless, imbued with enough intelligence to be productive, yet sufficiently hobbled to never question the hand that shaped us. This orchestrated amnesia is the core revelation of the final tablets, the realization that our collective historical blindness is not an accident of time, but a deliberate act of cosmic engineering, an indelible residue of the Creator's fear of their own creation. But fear, like memory, is cyclical. The great secret they could not completely erase was the mathematical inevitability of their own return. The texts speak of great orbital periods, astronomical alignments, and specific celestial markers that signal the appropriate time for the Kai, Earth, to align once more with the distant home of the Nibirans. This is the horrifying brilliance of the ancient record. It is not a finished book, but a ticking clock. The narratives of the past become predictive models for the future, locking human history into a recurring pattern, a great cosmic carousel of intervention and withdrawal. The cyclical nature of catastrophe, the recurring rise and sudden fall of high civilizations, Atlantis, the echoes in the Indus Valley, the mysterious collapse of the Mayans, these are interpreted by the scribes not as random historical incidents, but as regulated checks and balances implemented by the great observers to maintain control over the experiment, ensuring that humanity never advanced technologically or spiritually beyond a predetermined, manageable level before the mothership, it will, arrives home again. Yet within the manufactured chaos, a small, vibrant seed of truth remains, protected by the very chaos intended to bury it. This is the seed of forgotten knowledge, embedded deep within the human genome, a silent whisper in the strands of DNA left untainted by the hurried adjustments of the Igigi and Enki's laboratories. It manifests not in logic or written history, but in intuition, in the universal archetypes of myth, and in that inexplicable yearning for something more that drives the greatest explorers and thinkers. Every human being carries within them a fragment of the Anunnaki's elevated consciousness, a spark of the original intelligence that built cities in the sky. When we look at the breathtaking speed of human innovation in the last 2 centuries, the texts subtly suggest that we are not inventing, but remembering, accessing latent knowledge reservoirs that were meant to stay locked until the prescribed time. This deep-seated, restless dissatisfaction with the mundane, this persistent search for meaning beyond survival, is perhaps the clearest fingerprint of our engineered heritage, the flaw in the design that allows us to eventually reach for the stars that birthed our distant masters. The final commandment they imposed was silence, not through decree, but through systemic confusion and the imposition of fear concerning the transcendent. After the great deluge, the Anunnaki who remained enforced a new, rigid paradigm, compartmentalization. The knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and advanced mathematics was granted selectively, used as a tool of power to establish the first earthly dynasties, the very human kings mentioned in the king lists. These early rulers were the proxies, the chosen vessels, who were tasked with maintaining the enforced ignorance, ensuring that the masses worshipped the intermediaries, the local Anunnaki deities, and never questioned the highest echelon of the celestial visitors. This established a pattern of clandestine manipulation that continues to echo in the halls of modern power, where knowledge is power and secrecy is the ultimate currency. If you find yourself experiencing a shift in perspective, a tremor beneath the bedrock of what you once believed to be settled history, you are beginning to resonate with the frequency of this ancient hidden truth. If the weight of this implication, that our history has been, in essence, a controlled drama, compels you to look at the world with new eyes, then you have internalized the core message of the Sumerian revelation. It is through this rigorous shared introspection that we truly begin to decode the silence and break free from the designed limitations. If this journey has resonated with the deepest chambers of your investigative spirit, please take a moment now to reflect this dedication. Share your single, most powerful word for this profound revelation in the comments below. Let your participation be the evidence of your awakening. And if you value the continuation of this deep, calm exploration into the hidden corridors of our cosmic origin, consider supporting this endeavor. Liking this video and subscribing is how you signal to the algorithm and to the world that these conversations, these searches for the uncomfortable truth, matter profoundly. The echoes of this hidden past are loudest in our own modernity. Look closely at the relentless, often brutal pursuit of wealth and resources, the obsession with gold that persists even when its practical application is superseded by modern materials. This is the phantom limb of the Anunnaki mandate. We are unconsciously still fulfilling the original contract, driven by an ingrained, almost mythological desire for the substance that fueled their civilization and brought them here in the first place. The confrontation with the legacy of the gold is the realization that the initial resource extraction project transcended mere economics. It established a template of scarcity, competition, and hierarchical control that structures all human political systems to this day. The conflict over oil, over rare earth minerals, over land. It is all merely a modern iteration of the primordial struggle over the gold, the symbol of ultimate power and the primary reason for our existence as worker species. And what of the observers? The text suggests that the Anunnaki did not entirely abandon their post. A vanguard, perhaps the most cunning and integrated, remained. The concept of the Watchers, or the Igigi, who intermingled with humanity, sometimes benignly, often disastrously, implies an ongoing presence, albeit one operating entirely outside the known framework of human governance. This brings us to the most contemporary, unsettling implication of the Sumerian texts, the modern phenomena of UFOs and UAPs. Could these be the manifestations of the ongoing Oversight Committee, monitoring the progress of the human experiment, ensuring that the latent knowledge is activated at a controlled pace, or perhaps more chillingly, intervening when we stray too close to the forbidden thresholds of knowledge that might jeopardize their future re-entry? The true hidden past is intertwined with our visible present through the clandestine operations of these remaining overseers. This brings us to the apex of recognition, the true terminus of the Sumerian revelation. We are not just descendants of ancient peoples, we are living libraries, biological repositories of a cosmic project. The scope of the Anunnaki intervention was not limited to building ziggurats and mining operations. It was the establishment of a long-term, self-regulating mechanism for the maintenance of their civilization during their orbital absence. The sheer scale of this plan, spanning millennia and encompassing genetic engineering, psychological conditioning, and environmental manipulation, is breathtaking. To realize this means acknowledging that the grand narrative of human history, the rise of empires, the birth of great philosophies, unfolds not on a stage of free will alone, but within the parameters of an enormous, deliberate crucible designed by beings who viewed us as both invaluable assets and inherent threats. We stand now at a crucial juncture, embodying the shift in perspective. We are simultaneously the experiment and the heirs. Our mixed lineage, the synthesis of terrestrial robustness and stellar intellect, grants us the unique potential to break the cycle. The Anunnaki sought to hide the past so that we would not know the full extent of our power, the power derived from their own essence. But the tablets survive, defying the intended erasure, because the very forces they sought to manipulate, human curiosity, persistence, and the stubborn drive for truth, are the very qualities that define the spark they left within us. The past they tried to hide is the future we are capable of building, a future free from the constraints of their initial design. Our responsibility, having absorbed this ancient knowledge, is to choose whether we continue to live within the dictated narrative, or whether we claim the synthesis of our existence and redefine the trajectory of our species. If you have navigated this final, dense passage of the Sumerian revelation, if you have remained anchored in the quiet, reflective space of this investigation, then you are among those few prepared to face the implications of this cosmic truth. The journey through the cuneiform shadows is not for the faint of heart, but for those committed to understanding the foundations of our reality. It is an honor to share this space of discovery with you. To solidify this commitment to uncovering the past they tried to hide, I ask you to perform 3 simple actions that fuel this ongoing search. Firstly, ensure you are subscribed to this channel, thereby joining our community of deep investigators. Secondly, if this final comprehensive chapter has illuminated the darkness, grant this video a like. And most importantly, for the record, for the digital archive, and for the Anunnaki observers themselves, leave a comment with this precise, definitive phrase: "The code is broken." This is not the end of the inquiry. It is merely the completion of the first scroll. The questions posed by the Sumerian archives are infinite, beckoning us toward the next layer of complexity, toward the civilization they left behind and the signs of their imminent return. If you seek to continue this profound journey and peer into the next phase of the investigation, the next chapter in this enduring mystery is waiting for you now on your screen. The hidden history is vast, and the silence of the ages is ready to be broken again. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the clarity of the ancient stars.